Is that okay, Terry? All right. Good evening. I know you're not asleep. It's too cold outside. Unless you got in here and got warm and then dropped off. If you have your Bibles, turn to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. I have been substituting lately. And it's kind of nice because I go in and they have a lesson plan laid out for me. And I do whatever it is that they tell me to do. And I always make sure that I try and keep the children quiet. I heard someone within the last 3 or 4 years. Now, my wife has been teaching school for close to over 32 years, as long as we've been married. And these two people told me that teachers are no more than glorified babysitters. And of course, I know that there are other teachers here or related to teachers here, and you know better than that, and I know better than that. But I want you to know that a substitute is no more than a glorified babysitter, because that's what I do. As long as I keep them quiet and I take up their papers and I put them in the right place, then everybody's happy. And so I'm here this evening as a substitute. I got a call from Cody Sunday afternoon, and he asked if I would fill in for him. We need to think about him and Lauren, isn't it, Lauren? Okay. We need to think about the two of them, because I imagine wherever it is that they are, it's a whole lot warmer than it is right here. I don't know if pity would be a good word to use for them. Maybe they'd pity us because we're here. On the other hand, I talked to my oldest son this afternoon. He lives just outside of Detroit, and he said that it's kind of funny. He said that the weather said that it was supposed to snow showers this afternoon starting about 12. And he was at work, and at 12 it started snowing, and they had been averaging about an inch an hour. And so they were up to about 4 inches by the time I got off the phone with him this afternoon. And I know that they were calling maybe for some snow showers around here, but I think the rain's all quit. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, if you've got your Bibles, turn to John chapter 4. I have just want to talk about this. That's one of the problems of being a substitute. You're not left with any lesson plans. Cody said, you just do whatever it is that you want to do. And so I figured John 4 would be a good one. So John, the Gospel of, is a very interesting and a unique Bible book. It, unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, doesn't follow the same footprint. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more narratives. They're more story-based. John wrote his book 35 years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote theirs. He has a purpose statement right there at the end of the book, almost. In John 20, 30, and 31, he wrote, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which aren't written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." So John is the gospel of belief. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have an awful lot of miracles in them. John has 7. That's it, a total of 7. And at the end of each one of those miracles, John doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs. At the end of each one of those signs, it talks about the belief of the people, or the lack of belief in the people that he has affected with his miracles. There is no miracle in this story, but there's an awful lot of good information. Jesus in John chapter 3 spent some time with Nicodemus. And of course, Nicodemus was a ruler of the Jews. a member of the Sanhedrin, we figure, and upper crust of society, very well educated. You couldn't find a positive adjective to use about someone that wouldn't have fit Nicodemus. On the flip side here, in John chapter 4, we've got this woman. She was a Samaritan. She wasn't a Jew. We'll get to that in a few minutes. We find that not only was she not married, but she had been married 5 times before, and she was living with a man who was not her husband. So education-wise, we don't know anything. Maybe she had a little education. She had some idea of what religion meant to her and to her people, but she was about as polar opposite of Nicodemus as you could have come up with. So these 2 chapters do teach about belief and the importance of it, but Jesus is addressing 2 completely different people. I'm going to read the first 4 verses, and then we're going to get down to it. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself didn't baptize, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So Jesus had been in Judea. He had been in and around Jerusalem. He decided to go back to Galilee. And there's an interesting little comment here that John gives us in verse 4. It says he needed to go through Samaria. That gives us a little bit of information that we can fill in from what we know about the relationship between Jews and Samaritans. Jews were God's chosen people during the Old Testament. By the way, who are God's chosen people today? Christians. Christians or saints or whatever you want to call us. Okay? And the Samaritans were on the outside looking in. Okay? They were hated by the Jews. They were considered half-breeds. You know, nowadays we don't like to talk about people. It's not even funny if you make a joke at someone else's expense. I think that's gone a little bit too far. Okay, but back then there was an absolute hatred between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans were descended from the people of the northern kingdom. And in 721, the Assyrians came in and they took the northern kingdom captive, took them away to wherever they took them. And the Assyrians were kind of cold-blooded. Now, I don't say that in the way that they killed a whole bunch of people. Maybe they did. I don't know. But to put down the people, they uprooted the best educated and the most powerful and the people with the most money. And they would take them away and they would resettle them in another part of their kingdom. And then they would bring people from another part of their kingdom and they would resettle them wherever the people they just took, and in this case it was the Samaritans, settled them there. So the people who were Samaritans or Jews that were left behind, people of the northern kingdom, intermarried with these people. Now, if you know much about the Old Testament, I imagine some of y'all do, was it right for the Jews to intermarry with other people of other races or ethnicities or whatever? Why not? Yeah, God told them not to. They were God's, what did I just ask? They were God's chosen people. And if you are one of God's chosen people, you're not supposed to intermarry with someone who is not one of God's chosen people. And so these Samaritans, these Jews from the northern kingdom, intermarried with those people. Now, like I said, the Jews, we've got to understand, and I don't have any slides or anything like that to show you, the country was divided up into 3 parts. We're talking about the west side of the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee. And you got Galilee up here at the north. Jesus was from Galilee. He was not born, but he was raised in Nazareth. And then just south of that, on the west side of the Jordan River. You've got Samaria, and then down in the south, you've got Jerusalem and Jericho and Bethlehem, and of course this is Judea. Okay, this is the old southern kingdom. By the way, I didn't mention this. In 586, the southern kingdom was taken away into Babylon, but God had promised those people through the prophets, said, now look, you're going to go away into exile, but about 70 years you'll be able to come back. And of course we know that under Ezra and Nehemiah, those Jews came back. And they were full-blooded Jews, okay? So I don't know if it's right to say it. They had a right to look down on these Samaritans. Whether they did or not back then, I don't know. We wouldn't want to do that nowadays. But again, we're being politically correct. Okay, and so here we've got this two parts that are Galilee and Judea that are filled with Jews, and in between them is Samaria. Now, do you remember when Jesus sent out the 70 and sent out the 12, his apostles, and he told them, he said, now if somebody allows you to come into their house, then you go in and you stay there with them and you leave a blessing on them. But if they don't allow you to come in, what did he say you're supposed to do? Anybody know? What? Yes, dust off your feet. Okay? You're supposed to show them a certain amount of, I guess that would be scorn or dislike. Okay, dust off the soles of your feet. The Jews felt the same way about the Samaritans. And so, like I said, we're talking about the west side of the Jordan River. Jesus and a lot of the people that would travel between Galilee and Samaria, they would jump over, and I don't know if they had ferries. I doubt they had a bridge. They'd go over the Jordan River, they'd travel up the east bank, and then they'd cross back over just south of Galilee, just south of the Sea of Galilee. And that way they didn't have to dirty their feet with the dirt of Samaria. But like I said, we've got John who said he needed to go through Samaria. Now, why did Jesus need to go through Samaria? Any idea? Short? Well, yeah, you're right there. It is shorter. Yep. But again, he needed to go through Samaria. And what? Opportunity. There was a woman there in Sychar who needed to meet Jesus. And Jesus didn't care anything about the things that bother us or that bothered people back during the first century. Of course, the Jews were the chosen people, but who did Jesus die for? Did he just die for the Jews? Who? For all? Did Jesus die for the Muslims and the Buddhists and all of those other people? All the denominations and the Roman... Jesus died for everybody because we're all created in God's image, and God created each and every one of us. So Jesus needed to go through Samaria because there was a woman there that he needed to meet up with. Verses 5 through 10. He came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So here we've got Jesus come into this town. Archaeologists and scholars have a pretty good idea of where this town was. It's about halfway between the south part of Galilee and the northern part of Judea. Okay, so it would have been about the halfway point. We've got Jesus and his disciples. They stopped there. There was a well there. I made the mistake once because I've seen pictures of parts of that area of the world thinking that it was kind of a desert. It wasn't a desert. You know, they had farmlands around there. But of course, you know, if you've been traveling, and they'd probably been traveling for 4, 5, 6 hours, they probably would have been what? Thirsty. They would have been hungry too, but the well would have been a natural stopping point. You know, that's where people stopped. If they wanted something to drink, you always stopped at a well or something like that. You know, back in our country, you know, when people traveled by horseback, I can remember those old westerns. I don't know if I ought to share this with you, but you know, I've been out at NHC and I've been out at Raintree Manor or Willow Branch. And you know, I guarantee you can walk down the hall of those two nursing homes and not miss a minute of Gunsmoke or Bonanza, because every TV in there is tuned to the Western Channel. And so I've seen my fair share of Westerns. I've read books about it, this, that. And what was one of the most important things? Now, the most important thing when you were out west was a horse. You needed a horse. If you didn't have a horse, you were probably going to die. But the next most important thing was water. And you needed a canteen or some sort of back then they would have had skins. And so here we've got these men. We don't know how many of the apostles were with Jesus or if there were other disciples with him, but would have been a mess of them. And they stopped there by the well. Jesus, it says, sat down to rest. It says that he was wearied from his journey. It was about the 6th hour. Anybody know what the 6th hour was back then? It was noon. It was noon. Even today, the Jews and the Muslims still go by that same system. Their day starts at 6 o'clock in the evening. So 50 minutes ago, Thursday would have started for them. And the night goes through 6 in the morning, and then they get up and their day starts. And that's the way they tell time over there. We go from midnight to midnight. Okay, so it was the 6th hour. It was about noon. Jesus was weary. How long had he been walking? You know, if it was about an 80-mile trip from Galilee down to Jerusalem, vice versa is the way he was going. How long would he have been traveling, do you reckon? What could have been that long? And think about it. I don't know about y'all, but when you go on a trip, when do you leave? In the morning. Now, if you work, then you might leave as soon as work's done. Okay, you might leave at 4, 5, 6 o'clock. Okay, but we can imagine they probably started earlier than that. Maybe they started early, the morning or two before, and they had been walking for, well, pretty near all day. They would have eaten before they left. They would have eaten a noon meal, we imagine, and then another meal wherever they stopped at night. And they got to here, and Jesus was tired. Maybe this well offered a little bit of shade. You know, you've seen maybe some movies from that part of the world. They have these oases, and you know, they've got some sort of a spring that bubbles up from the ground. And if you've got water, then what else do you see? Trees, grass, but trees. So I figure Jesus probably, there were several trees, and I'm reading into it. This is not in the Bible. But he sat down in the shade, and he was going to rest. It was about the 6th hour. It was about noon, and a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Any of y'all old enough to remember wells? Have you ever had to go and get water out of a well on a regular basis? Okay. What's that? Yep, what's it called again? What's it called again? Okay, a last. Yeah, a big old long thing. Yeah, and it's got a thing on the bottom, and it pours out into whatever bucket or something you brought with it. Yeah, we had some friends, and my daddy had some relatives out in Colombia, and I was fascinated by it. Of course, I imagine my daddy would have been happy if I'd have been out there going back and forth the whole time. Anything to wear me out. But she came to draw water. Now, it was about noon. When we think about heat, is noon a fairly warm time of the day? Yeah, sun's beating down. Usually it's about 12 to 2 or something is the hottest part of the day, okay? And I'm just guessing, and this is kind of the way that it went. Going to get water would have been a social event. You get up in the morning. I'm talking about the ladies, okay, because the men didn't get to do this. They didn't have to. They had their wives to do it for them. And they would get up in the morning, and the first thing they would do would be to go to the well and get some water. Or if there was a spring or an oasis or whatever. It's the first thing they would do in the morning because they would be using water off and on all day. People would drink it. You'd have some for the animals. Maybe there were dishes to wash. Maybe there were clothes to wash. I don't know what all. But it was first thing in the morning. And usually it was a group. Okay? Because as you go along, what do you do as you're going along with a group of people? You talk. You talk. And now I'm going to say, because I saw that Andy Griffith episode, it's not just the women that talk. You know, that poor fella that was selling those shoes, you know, and Andy and Barney had everybody head up about him being a music producer or whatever. Men would do this too, but it was a social event of the day. First thing in the morning, they'd probably meet on the outskirts of town. Maybe they wouldn't go in a group. Maybe they'd kind of filter out there. But, you know, you had your friend that you would walk along with. But this woman was going in the heat of the day. We don't have to guess why. Somebody tell me. I've already explained it. Do you know why? She was ostracized. She'd been married 5 times, which, by the way, was nowhere near a record. Okay, I've got something in my files, and I remember reading about a Roman couple, and she was marrying him as her, 22nd husband, and he was marrying her as his 23rd wife. And I don't know that those are exact numbers, but this was nowhere near a record. She'd been married 5 times, and she was living with a man who wasn't her husband. Now, kind of makes me wonder why she would have stayed in that town. But if she was raised there, born there, raised there, all of that, then, you know, we probably don't have to. We can understand why. She came to draw weather. It was noon. Scholars tell us it was about a mile from town out to this well. Now, you know, I don't know what kind of buckets you have. I do know that you can go to Lowe's and you can buy a 5-gallon bucket. It's even got the advertisements printed on it. You know, you'd think that if you're advertising for it, they'd sell it to you cheap, but they're probably $3 or $4 a piece. And you know, maybe I've seen the women in India and places like, they'll wear a yoke around their neck and they'll have a bucket each hanging down next to them. Maybe it was something like that. We don't know. But again, it was at the wrong time of day. She had gone to draw water. About a mile. How long would it have taken her? Well, I don't know, but it took her longer to get back than it did to get out there. I guarantee that. Maybe it took her 20 minutes to get there, but it probably took her 30 minutes to get back. You know, so she had been walking for a good deal of time. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." This was shocking. Verse 9, she says, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? And then John gives us another little bit of commentary, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Okay, Jewish men didn't talk to women in public. Now remember, these were Samaritans, okay? But Jewish men didn't talk to women in public. This was something that, and it had to do with the cleanliness whole thing. You know, I don't know how talking can make you unclean, but the Jews and some of the Pharisees, there was a group of Pharisees, they were called the bruised and bleeding ones. Okay, and this just fascinates me. Whenever they saw a woman on the street or on the road, they would close their eyes until the woman passed or until they passed. Now, I don't know how you'd know, but they would end up walking into buildings and trees or stumbling in a pothole or something like that. And, you know, but this was just women. Okay, this would have been Jewish women. You know, I'm talking about wives or daughters or aunts, even a mother. You didn't talk to a woman in public. Okay? This was a Samaritan. And remember, we've already talked about Samaritans and how the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along. It was the Jews not getting along with the Samaritans. And of course, there was reciprocation also. But, you know, Jesus was talking to a Samaritan woman. Now, all of this goes back to uncleanness. Okay? In the Old Testament, you were not supposed to associate with anyone who was unclean. Okay? And Samaritans were unclean. Now, I'm not talking about they hadn't had a shower. I'm talking about they were unclean because they were not Jewish. Okay? And so, Jesus asking her a question would have been shocking to her, and it was shocking to her. But he also asked her what? Give me a drink. And you know, it makes me wonder, you know, I've seen some of those old wells, and you know, you'd keep a dipper, I don't know, galvanized or something dipper hanging there on the edge of the well, and so you know, you draw the bucket or you said lass up, and you dip some water out of it and you take a drink. But Jesus not only talked to her, he also asked her for a drink. Now, she handed him something, okay? Then, well, it's only been within the last, 150 years that we know what germs are. Okay? And I don't think I have to tell you what happened hard to believe it's been 6 years. Okay? And we were all wearing masks and you know, scared to death that we were going to end up getting sick. And it was all because of that virus. Now, virus is not the same thing as a germ, but it can make you sick. Okay? This was not about sickness. Again, this was uncleanness. You know, if you ask someone for a drink of water like Jesus did, and you took that dipper from her, and you drank it, then that would have made Jesus ceremonially unclean for 7 days. That was the minimum, at least 7 days. And yet Jesus asked her for that. She asked, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? And of course, John said Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Okay, she was really surprised by this. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now, it's kind of a strange thing for us to try and grab a hold of. In John chapter 3, I mentioned Nicodemus. And Nicodemus came to Jesus and he asked Jesus, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? The question there is how. Okay, in this text right here, it's not about how, it's about where. And Jesus is going to answer this question, where, in the next couple of minutes. We might have time to get to that if I would, quit going off the subject. But Jesus said something here about living water. Living water during that day and age would have been water that ran, water that bubbled. I don't have to tell y'all, you've been down some of these country roads here in Warren County and you've seen some of these ponds. Okay, and kind of interesting because you get on up in July and August when it's been hot, when it starts to dry out. I wouldn't want to drink that water to save my life. Although, having said that, if it were to save my life, then I probably would. It'd probably make me deathly ill. Okay, but living water to the Jews and to the people of that day and age would have been water like in a creek or a stream, water that ran along. And that's what she was thinking about here. He would have given you living water. Now, these people had been drinking from this well for centuries. If you go back to the time of Jacob, and I guess I could have looked it up on a timeline, we're probably talking about 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 years since Jacob was around. That well had been in existence for that long. And it would have been good water, you know, because underneath a lot of these old wells, there were underground streams. Okay? And so the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" So here we've got this woman asking Jesus about this living water that he had been talking about here. She was very curious about it. And this is when she starts with the question, where do you get that living water? She wanted to know where, like Nicodemus wanted to know how. Okay, very important questions. And these are questions that we need to ask ourselves. You know, how can we be born again? We don't need to ask anybody that. Although if we don't know the answer, someone ought to be able to point it out in their Bible. You know, we're born again when we're baptized. You know, we have to go through the steps of getting to baptism. As far as this word right here, where do you get that living water? Jesus is about to explain that to her. She was thinking literally. She had the same problem that Nicodemus did. Nicodemus got very confused. I already read that. Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus was talking on a spiritual level, and she was hearing on a literal level. Okay, on an earthly level. And that was him. And the same thing here in this text. In Isaiah 12, 2 and 3, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For Yah, the Lord, is my strength and song. He also has become my salvation. Therefore, with joy, you will draw water from the wells of salvation." So Isaiah wrote that about 600 or 700 years prior to the time of Jesus. He talks about water from the wells of salvation. In John 7, on the last day, that great day of the feast, and talking about the last day of the Passover, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "If anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." So that was Jesus just in, a couple more months after that. Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water I shall give him will never thirst. But the water I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into eternal life." Now, it's again, if we think in a literal way, if we think in an earthly way, we're thinking like this woman. Okay? Jesus wanted her to understand that he had something special to give her. Okay? And he has something special to give all of us. We've got to remember that. It's more than just a drink of water. I can remember when I was younger, or even nowadays, but not so much because I've got a riding lawnmower. Wonderful things riding lawnmowers. But I can remember growing up Daddy always had a push mower. And I had to mow with push mower. And, I'd get out there in July and August, and it's just so hot. And I'd go in, and even tap water would taste good. Okay, you know how that is. I'm a water drinker. I don't drink much but water. And there's just something about water. It tastes sweet to me. There's something special about it. And I don't know that I would want to give up drinking water, but Jesus told her, he said, whoever drinks of this water, probably pointing to the well, will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Jesus went on to say that the water that he would give would produce a fountain of water springing into eternal life. Now, again, we're talking about this living water, and she was thinking in a practical way, an earthly way. She wasn't thinking the way that he was talking about it. Verses 15 through 18. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. Jesus said to her, Go, call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You have well said, I have no husband. For you've had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. Now, this woman wanted the water that Jesus was offering. In her own way of understanding, that was something that she was interested in. But you can tell that she was confused. She said, I don't want to be thirsty, and I don't want to have to come to this well every day or twice a day or however often. Okay? And she asked Jesus this question, and Jesus didn't answer her question. Jesus changed the subject. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and they changed the subject? It's kind of frustrating. It's kind of frustrating. He said, Go call your husband and come here. Now, it's important for us to understand that. This was a change in the direction of their conversation. He wanted to meet her need. Now, her need was not so much that she was thirsty, or that she needed water to wash clothes, or that she needed to wash dishes, or give water to the animals, or whatever. Her greatest need was not water. What was her greatest need? It was salvation. It was salvation, pure and simple. She'd been married to 5 different men, and she was now living with a man without any formalities of marriage. She was living a sinful life. We can go to Jesus, and the woman brought to him, is that in chapter 8? Brought to him in the very act of adultery, right there at the beginning of John chapter 8. These Pharisees and these lawyers and whatever asked Jesus a question. This woman was caught in the very act of adultery. We're supposed to stone her because that's what the law said. And remember what Jesus did? He changed the subject on them too. He bent down and he started drawing in the dirt or in the dust or writing things. Nobody knows what Jesus was doing at that time. And of course, we do go ahead and read that then those heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And the woman was left there with Jesus. And he looked up at her and said, Woman, where are those accusers? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And he said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, that's a beautiful statement. Jesus didn't get on to her because she'd done something wrong. But he did bring it down to where the rubber meets the road and say, you did do something wrong. Go and sin no more. And that's something we need to remember. I think it's wonderful what is done over here on Thursday. Helping people with clothes and with food and all sorts of benevolence. all of these things. But the thing that people need more than food and clothing and all of that is salvation. And we need to remember that. Jesus saw that in this woman. He saw her as a sinner. You need to get your life straightened out. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said, you have well said, I have no husband, for you have 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. Jesus did what? Up here. He read her mind, didn't he? Jesus, God, still do that today? Yeah. What is it? What's that song? He knows when you've been sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Yes. And Terry, you're exactly right. That's the man, the fat man with the hat and the red suit. And it's a made-up story. But God knows what we've been thinking when we sleep. I've used this illustration so many times before on a Sunday morning. And it works better on Sunday morning, by the way, because it's 7:15, okay? And you probably already had supper. But, I get up there and I'd say, hey, God knows that you're thinking about where you're going to go out to eat after the service is over. Or what you didn't prepare so that I could go home and serve my family or whatever. God knows all of that. He knew what this woman's life was all about. Jesus did. And God knows the same thing today. That's something that we need to remember. God, Jesus, can read our minds. And that can be a good thing if we're the right sort of person. But if we've been involved in things that we ought not be involved in, it ought to draw us up short. Because if it's a sin, then we need to repent of it. God already knows about it. Sometimes there are things that we don't even remember. That's the reason we can't pray the prayer, Lord, forgive me if I have any unforgiven sins, because we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Let me go on. Wait a minute, where was I? Okay. I got about another minute or two. Alan's not paying attention. Was that the first bell? Okay, thank you. All right. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Hey, I must know everything too. Sorry. I doubt it. I doubt it.
Well, the reason I'm saying that, we were pretty close last summer. It was a pretty nice day, had fun down. And, the Middle Eastern people, they really go for everything.
Uh-huh.
I don't blame them. And here's one of the little ladies up there. I speak to everybody, I carry on with that. And every one of them.
Right.
And here's one from the end. There's a time when I carry on with that. All pretty good, But, they understood what was said.
Right. Well, we lived 5 years in Michigan, and Dearborn, Michigan, where the Ford Motor Company is headquartered, has, I can't remember what the numbers are, has a greater population of Muslims than any other, percentage-wise, any other city in the country. And, we would go to Walmart or the store and we would see these women with these burqas and even the full face covering. So, no, I don't think they were instructed not to talk, but I think a Jewish man would know better than to speak to a woman, and especially a Samaritan. But again, Jesus was the exception. Yeah. So, thank you.